said that Birmingham's model was copied around the country. What was it about Birmingham's model that made it stand out?
I think that they were very efficient, and they had a very clear, straightforward plan as to why they wanted a building and a space of this size, because they knew they might need to expand. They needed big spaces inside buildings, and they needed big space for expansion. The expansion was into other buildings, so further blocks could be converted for hospital purpose, and of course the more patients you have, the more other staff you need as well, so you need more nurses, more doctors, more orderlies, that kind of thing. It was close to transport services as well, so the way that the recovering soldiers were taken from the battlefield to recovery stations to hospital services over there, and then brought by hospital ship across the channel to Southampton docks quite often, where they would be then taken to London, Birmingham, Liverpool, Leeds, Manchester, Glasgow, Newcastle, Bristol, all the big places where there were centres for hospital services. Birmingham was very good at having a rail link to Selly Oak. It was a good service, but they had it pre-converted so that you could get patients out of there. And then they had a road ambulance link from the railway station up to the hospital. So they thought that all these things through and how they could operate, where the nurses would be, that kind of thing. So it was very planned and very well arranged, and they'd followed the guidelines as to how to lay out the hospital beds in a big open space so that they were all in neat, orderly rows. One of the things that the military thought was that orderliness and tidiness and neatness was therapeutic in itself. Perhaps not always everybody's perfect solution, but they did do that. And when they needed to expand, we already had a list of places where we could contact for additional building space. So this involved important local families like the Chamberlains and the Cadburys, who gave some of their properties, and they became military hospitals. The local schools were contacted so that they could be converted to hospital space as well. Those schools already had a plan in place to manage what happens to the children. What happened to the children was that they would be going to neighbouring schools, and those neighbouring schools would then operate a shift system so that the staff and the pupils would have an arrangement in place that they were able to step into when they were required to vacate their school and make it available for hospital needs. So there was a lot of that kind of like pre-planning and pre-thinking. They weren't fully prepared for the kind of injuries that people got. They still thought in very 19th century terms in the injuries that they expected. They expected a lot of cavalry sabre charging and things like that, as well as pistol shots and musketry. But of course, by this time things had changed. Artillery was much more ferocious, and rifles were there, not muskets, that kind of thing. And so the injuries people were receiving were not from balls, they were from bullets, and they were experiencing new impact injuries with bullets, because Professor Barling, who was chief surgeon here and head of the medical school, he wrote several papers about his experience of treating the patients here and out of the front, where he spent some time. And gunshot wounds in the First World War were a new experience for both the soldiers, but also the medics treating them. So instead of having it pass through your body and goes out the other side, the projectile, the way it is directed and its velocity and its manufacture mean that when it goes inside the body, it begins to spiral like that. So it causes a kind of cone of injuries as it goes inside your body, not just the impact hole. And so they were having to find ways of managing patients suffering from that kind of injury. And then there were all this problem with disease, trench foot, and other things that you get in trench warfare. So they were experiencing and trying to deal with new types of problems. The injury are facial injury. Why do we have so many jaw injuries? Because people were suffering explosions which went off in their face, and so they had lots of face injuries, and they were terribly badly damaged in the face. You'll find that there is an important Sidcup in Middlesex in London was a centre for treating jaw injuries, and they did a lot of plastic surgery there. We did some plastic surgery, so you could in fact use techniques which, interestingly from my point of view, there's a book from the 1590s which is the first book of plastic surgery, and explains how you can repair a person's damaged nose or their lips or their cheek, that kind of thing, by skin grafting. And the way you do the skin graft is to attach the arm to your head in a kind of like fixed, like a straitjacket, so you couldn't move it. They cut your arm and they graft skin from the soft part of your arm onto your face, so that you get your face skin is being restored by skin from your own body. And then they'd cut the surgery, and then you'd have skin replacement on your face, and then they could rebuild that. So people's faces were being rebuilt like that. But that's not what was specialised in here. Professor Billington specialised in bone injury to the jaw. A really serious problem. He's treated over 2,500 patients here that had come back during the war with this type of injury. And when he started off his treatment, there were people who, he read the textbooks, and the textbooks say, you use these kind of devices that you get in dentistry. So it's like bits of metal pins and plates and joints and hinges that they put inside your mouth to try and replace the loss of the bone, so that you get a structure and also some kind of movement. But he said it didn't work very well. It's not very practical because the bone and the metal doesn't work. You get sepsis because you got kind of like still artificial bodies inside your skin, and it takes infections in there with it. It doesn't look very good. People don't feel comfortable, and it's not very aesthetic. So he looked for alternatives, and gradually, incrementally, after trying with several different options, he came up with a solution of taking a bone graft from your hip. So he'd take a curve out of your hip and he fits that to your jaw. And this worked really well. So gradually over time, you can see from the photographs that he retained, that we've got some in our archive. He shows you before, during and after type of photographs from his research files, which he privately retained. I think he should have given them back to the military, but it was his own kind of like research project that he'd been continuing to work on, and he needed these photographs, which show the success of that surgery technique, which he more or less pioneered himself. I don't think that when the war broke out, anybody had really thought that you could do this sort of thing and do it successfully. But he had so many patients, and he had such a lot of experience in the difficulties, and the solutions were not to hand from the textbooks. He improvised them, and he did extraordinary work. Other people did important work with dental reconstruction as well, also a specialism here on the hospital.